So, without further ado, I'm going to get into the content of today and share with you what I see are five huge changes in the HR function in 2026 and onwards. And these five shifts that I'm going to share with you today are really based upon a new book that came out yesterday called The Quiet Reckoning. And I'll explain why I published this book and the contents about it, but also where did the idea come from. And really, I've been working for the last couple of years on a very hard question with chief HR officers, a question that is pretty uncomfortable for most of them. I've been asking them, what do you want the function to become? And those HR leaders, and there's been about 500 of them interviewed over the course of the last 2 years, 18 months. They've all said, actually, Dan, I really want human resources to become more strategic. And I said, oh, that's interesting. That's something I've been hearing for over a decade now. I've been hearing that comment about HR being more strategic. I've been hearing the comment about HR having a seat at the table. And it's not something that's necessarily new. But they said, yeah, but this time is different. We need to become more strategic. We really want to be more strategic. And I said, okay, well, explain to me what you think about that and how you're going to do that. And they said, well, we've really changed our operating model in previous years. We've built centers of excellence. We've built out people analytics. We know more about our people in the companies and the data than we ever have done before. And now we're at this moment in time where we're kind of swimming in technology. And I've pushed them on that. And I've said, okay, so you're in this great moment where you've done some reorg, you're swimming in technology, you know the data of your business, but do you have a better strategy? And they've said, no, we are less strategic than ever before. We are less strategically certain than ever before. And we need to do something about that. And I fully agree with that. I think this is probably HR's time to shine. But in order to shine and become more strategic, we need to be very intentional about that as a function. So I started researching and overlaying what I was hearing with them through the lens of artificial intelligence, which of course is the hot topic right now. And I basically found out and scratched beneath the surface that at the end of the day, artificial intelligence is, yes, a transformative technology, but it's only a transformative technology if you want to change how you're doing things and why you're doing things. And if you don't, it really just reveals patterns in your organization and strengthens those patterns. So if you were doing administration, AI can help you do more administration. If you're doing strategy, it can help you do more strategy. And what I've observed is the best companies and the companies that are going to win in the next decade are not necessarily the ones who have the best AI and technology, but they are going to be the ones that face this quiet reckoning first, this choice that they have to become strategic or become automated. And actually, when I look at HR functions right now, HR has just grown and evolved into becoming pretty expensive administrators with very fancy sounding job titles. Why has that been allowed to happen? Not because anything bad was happening, but actually we just didn't design intentionally the function. And actually, we've been struggling with this burden of administrative weight for years now. Whenever I talk to anyone in the function, they say, I'm busy, I'm overloaded, I've got 100 million things on my plate. And it's true, everybody does have a lot of things to do. Everybody in HR is busy, but the question is, what are they busy with? And I've observed HR business partners. You don't have to admit to me right now on this call, but you may be one of them, or you may know some of them who run around day in, day out, fighting fires, always rushing to the next urgency, always counting the number of FTE that they have in the workforce, always trying to count how much training people are doing and the quality. So it's become an administrative function. But of course, AI can help with so much of that administration now. We can augment or automate all of that, basically. So that leaves us in this very vulnerable and uncomfortable position, which is if we're no longer busy because we're doing busy work, what do we do? And the choice is very clear. You can either reduce and remove people from the HR function. So you might be 400 people today. Tomorrow you can be 40, and maybe in 2 years you can be 4. Or you can say, actually, can I take that 400 person talent pool that I have and put them to use in a better way, in a way that's positive and creates value for the business? And I think that's the massive opportunity for HR. So as HR becomes less focused on administration and bureaucracy and counting things, it can become much more strategic. And I think the barrier that HR was facing was never really intellectual or aspirational. Everybody has said the function wants to be strategic, needs to be strategic, but it was actually this physical sheer burden and weight of all of the administration that we've been doing. So now AI is helping remove that. There is a choice. And that's what I call the quiet reckoning. And at the end of the day, the reckoning definitely isn't structural. It is structural, it's not technological, because AI and technology is more or less democratized for everyone. I'm sure you all have a mobile phone in your pocket, and on that mobile phone, you probably have 3, 4, 5 large language models that you use day in, day out. So yes, there's better AIs, yes, there's better technology, but actually people have access to it. HR functions have access to it. Whether you're a massive multinational employer or a startup, everybody has opportunity to use the technology. So the question becomes much more about, do we have the capability and the skill that we need in HR to be strategic and deliver the function? We also need to ask a structural question, which is, do we have the operating model and the rhythm to make sure our function is working according to the needs of the future? And do we have the strategic capability? So, we have really become a function which is great at execution and making sure we're complying with the rules and regulations, we're paying people on time and in the right way. But actually, when you take that execution away and you ask people to do strategy work and strategic thinking, we need to make sure we're equipped to do that. So that's the context, basically. And within that context, I've identified 5 roles that become so important for human resources moving forwards. And they're 5 roles that really only humans can hold. And if I had a tangerine, I'd probably hold it up to the camera right now and say, actually, a tangerine is quite a good metaphor for what's happening. AI is enabling us to peel back the layers, the things that we were doing previously, and leave us with a juicy middle, which is the strategic opportunity. So what's happening is we're seeing, and I'll go through these 5 in detail, but we're seeing 5 big shifts around the world of work, the world of how we judge things, the trust that we have inside our organizations, how we develop skills and capabilities, and the culture inside organizations. So when it comes to work, the first shift is really moving away from just, being a process owner, really, to actually deliberately designing work for our function and for our colleagues. The second is moving away from just providing a service to the business and actually strategically interpreting that and adding more value to the business. The third is moving away from being a policy enforcer and just ticking the box to actually building trust inside organizations. The fourth is moving away from being just a training provider and a coordinator into actually managing a concept that I'm going to share with you called developmental debt, which is very, very powerful. And the fifth is, moving away from just compliance and ticking the boxes to really managing and implementing a great culture, a culture of innovation, a culture where we can be strategic and thrive. So this is what it looks like for HR. The good news is only humans can do the 2 position. Okay, only humans really can add value when we move to the new way of work, which is great for us because it is human. Just going to make sure everybody's muted. I hear some noise. Okay, so let's go one by one on these and double click on each of them. So the first is moving from process owner to work designer. Now, I know all of you struggle with onboarding, for example. What happens on day 1 when an employee walks into the office? Well, the first question is, can they access the office? The second question is, if they can access the office, do they have a laptop on their first day? The third question is, if they have a laptop, do they have a meeting with their line manager so they know what they have to be doing? And the fourth question is, when they go to lunch with their colleagues, can they, do they know how to do that? And can they get lunch in the canteen, for example? And I know that in most companies that process doesn't work because we're just, looking at our piece of the pie, piece of the puzzle. And actually, I think what HR needs to do is rethink work end to end. And this is very important because actually, if HR doesn't step into this work redesign process, IT and technology teams are just going to start automating processes without really thinking through those consequences. So, as technology enables us to do things, I want you to ask two questions. The first question is, where does removing human interaction cost us more than it saves? And the second is, where does automation speed up things but actually erode trust or judgment in a process that actually makes it work? And as I say, if we leave those things, those process redesigns to technology teams, they will automate everything because the technology is brilliant, but we'll lose the human element. And sometimes that human interaction is what makes the process. So I think HR needs to be involved in those conversations. It needs to be helping the organization redesign work. And it needs to be really consciously thinking, is this process human? Is this human and AI? Or is it AI only? And I think if we don't do that, no one else in the organization will. So that's the first shift. How do we move from silos and processes to actually helping the organization redesign work? And it's interesting because all of you will know the MIT Sloan research that came out last year that said 95% of companies had failed to achieve the benefits in the business case for their AI implementation, despite having spent between 30 and 40 billion US dollars on the implementation of AI. And for me, that was interesting as I read through the report and double clicked. It became very clear that actually why companies were failing was because of the culture they had and the fact that they weren't redesigning the work. They were just asking the AI to follow the same process as a human. And I don't know about you, I'm fairly fast, but an AI can probably generate a PowerPoint 10 times as fast as me. It can probably write 100 emails in the time it takes me to write one. That doesn't sound like a good future of work. We need to redesign the processes. We need to challenge the status quo and ask, what are we doing and why? So that's the first shift. The second shift is a very, very important shift, and it's a deeply human shift. We've been great in human resources for the last 5 years or so. We've been implementing HRIS platforms like Workday, SAP, SuccessFactors, all of these platforms. And we've been starting to know really well the data of our organization. Well, the good news is AI can analyze data faster than any HR team. AI can probably infer a few things that humans are missing, so it becomes a great sparring partner for us. But actually, that is not the value that's happening right now. I went to a company last week. This is a true story. I was sitting in on a meeting and someone presented some data. And after the meeting, I asked them, why did you present the data? And their answer was, because ChatGPT told me to. And I said, that's terrible. We didn't apply any human logic to this then. We're just following the machine. And it got me thinking, because actually the value is not in the data of itself. The value is in the interpretation of the data. So the AI can help us with predictive analytics. It can help us map, skills gaps, for example. It can help us synthesize performance across an organization. It can help us report employee engagement scores. But what it can't do is it can't add the human layer that you can see, which is, for example, in the engagement scores, we all know managers who've got 90% engagement in their team and they're great managers. We also know managers who have 90% engagement in their team and they are poor managers and they're ruling by fear and their team is giving them great results because they're fearful. We know that and the AI doesn't. So the best HR functions and the best data analytic leaders now are not the ones who are just going to the board and saying, here's the data, here are the numbers, look at my very, very pretty analysis. They're the ones who are saying, here's the data, here are the numbers, and here is the hidden truth and our recommendations and our interpretation. And that is the value that we can bring. And that is the value that high performing HR functions are bringing as well. So they are becoming strategic interpreters, not just service providers. And I think that's a very powerful lens and a powerful shift. Number 3 is playing out across organizations big and small, from Europe to North America to South America. Everywhere I look, I'm seeing this pattern emerging. And actually, it's strange because AI has been around for, of course, a long time, but in popular modern history the last few years. But actually, many companies are still stuck in this phase one, or many individuals are stuck in phase one. Actually, as I've been having these conversations and doing this research, I've noticed that trust actually surfaces as the real constraint for AI adoption, definitely not the technology. And most employees go through these three stages, and HR can really help by building trust early in the process. So the first stage, as you start implementing AI, that shows up is typically anxiety. And we saw that in the media 2 years ago, 18 months ago. AI is going to take all of our jobs. AI is going to change the world. Tesla, with their robotic taxis, automated taxis, are going to be flooding the streets. Now, it's not to say that that won't happen, but actually, as technology comes in, that does create anxiety. And we saw it as the internet was first invented. Everybody thought the internet was going to just automate everything, destroy value, and cause chaos around the world. And of course, there was job displacement, but for actually every one job that was removed, 2.6 new jobs were created, which was a study coming out of McKinsey. So, technology is not in and of itself bad, but it does make people anxious. The press doesn't help. They contribute to this fear and fear mongering and scaredness that's in the workforce. And that's typically what I see and how I see people turning up day in, day out. So that's the first stage. Then companies, tread very carefully. They start to implement AI, and, most organizations have probably implemented Microsoft Copilot, for example. Well, I'm observing a very interesting thing with the use of Microsoft Copilot and other AIs, which is then employees move into a stage of resistance. Now, that is always following after anxiety. People pushing back against the use of AI. And there's 7 or 8 really key excuses for not embedding or using AI in your function. Many people say, I'm too busy to learn this. I don't have time. My manager's not asking me to use it, so I'm not going to use it. I wrote an email once and it made a mistake, so therefore it's bad. These excuses come to the forefront, and people resist the use of technology because they were anxious, they may still be anxious, and they push back and they criticize. And I've been in executive team meetings where just 2 or 3 voices start to criticize and resist against the use of AI, and the whole organization then has that negative perception of the use of AI. So you really need to be aware of that resistance and be able to fight back against it. And you only do that when you can foster a true curiosity from your employee base. And you do that by building trust, of course. And when you have curiosity and you say, actually, we're testing, we're learning, we're here to grow the pie and expand. We're not looking at technology just for automation and efficiency. We're looking at it to add new business value. The conversation starts to change. But of course, trust and curiosity are not things that you can just turn on a tap overnight and the world changes. They're things that you have to build consciously over time. So if you haven't started talking about AI, if you haven't started explaining what your vision is and why you think it will be good for the business, it's probably the time to start doing so now. And HR, of course, can play a vital role in that. And interestingly, what I've seen is AI, it really amplifies the culture around trust that you have in your organization as it is today. And I've got a great example to share with you. I was visiting 2 manufacturing sites from the same company in 2 different locations. And one of them had very high levels of trust in the employee engagement scores. And one of them had very low levels of trust. And it was interesting because when you went to the manufacturing site that had high levels of trust, and you spoke to the team, and they said, oh, yes, the company has implemented monitoring through AI for our safety. So they have cameras in the ceilings, making sure that the workers are not stepping too close to the dangerous machines. They're not crossing the lines. They're taking sufficient breaks. And they said, we love that because they're helping us work in a safer and more effective way. And we're really grateful for a company that takes care of our well-being and enables us to do the best we can in the workplace. And then I went to the same company in a low trust location, and they'd implemented the same monitoring technology. And the employee said, we really, really dislike this. We think we're being monitored. We think we're being watched. We're under constant surveillance, and the company's just trying to squeeze more and more out of us. And it was at that moment in time I said, wow, the trust and the culture that you have is really amplified for better or for worse because of the use of AI. So that's shift three. How do you move away just from being a function that just looks at enforcing policy, following rules and regulations, and really moves to building true and genuine trust because it's in the best interests of everyone? Now, shift four, I dare say this is the most interesting and most important shift of the five. Now, HR has been great at doing training or being the coordinator of training. We've been great at building Excels to manage and monitor and measure the outcomes and the quality and the number of hours and who was receiving training. But that is not good enough now. Now, as I've been doing this research, I've created this concept of developmental debt, which I'm going to explain to you. And that's the shift which HR has to be focused on. So there's two things at play here. The first is, yes, we need to teach people about AI in general and AI literacy, and it could be any skill in the workforce, of course. So any training that you need, any literacy that you need, but AI for the sake of this. But interestingly, it's not enough only to train people how to use Microsoft Copilot. We need to train people AI capability, which is to say, okay, you technically know how to use Microsoft Copilot or your chosen AI, but do you know when to use it? And why to use it? Can you explain its use? Do you know when to push back against its recommendations? Do you know how to socialize and take action based upon the decisions or the information that comes out of the machine? And I think that next layer of capability building and judgment is really, really important. And probably if I'm looking at it, it's an 80-20 rule at the moment. 80% of companies are doing the technical training, and only 20% are doing that training about building capability and the judgment and really understanding the tools. So that's the first watch out. But number two, around developmental debt. This is a concept. Basically, how can I say it? Let me give some examples. If you want to be a great leader, or if you are a great leader, how did you become a great leader? You probably built your leadership muscle, right? So you got stronger and stronger every day. You did your exercise. And what did that entail? That meant making gut decisions. That meant having difficult conversations. That meant having experiences and a lived history. If you're a great recruiter, how did you become a great recruiter? It's probably because you had a conversation with 2,000 people, or you've seen 10,000 CVs, and you know that actually people from company A moving to company B do well. You know that because you've seen it and you've experienced it. Now, if AI can automate those difficult conversations or help us with those difficult conversations, if AI can screen all of the CVs for us, how do you become a great leader? How do you become a great recruiter? You're not building the muscle, and therefore we're accumulating a developmental debt, which means actually at the time that a leader needs to make a decision based upon their gut feeling, or they need to make a decision very fast because something urgent is happening, in those moments of pressure, they actually become exposed and they show that they're actually brittle because they haven't done the training, the repetition, and the development that they needed to do to become great in their profession. So it's really interesting because just because you can automate something doesn't mean you should. And we need to be conscious, like in principle number one, about work redesign, what stays human and what is human and machine and what is just machine. And this is very important. So I have a few ideas on how do you start to engineer that developmental friction. So for example, you might say, okay, we're going to have AI-free zones in our leadership programs. So our leaders just get to learn things without the use of AI. You may say, actually, we're going to show our reasoning for how we've made decisions. So we really understand, why did the AI contribute to this? How did it contribute to it? And how did the human contribute? We may give people stretch assignments before they're ready. So they start developing a muscle because they're doing something that's hard and difficult and new to them. And we may also say, let's do a reflection every time. So an after action review, every time an AI makes a decision or, a major decision in the organization. So we really understand, why did that happen? How did that happen? And what are the consequences? So on and so forth. So I think this is something not many companies are aware of. They're not consciously thinking about it. In the popular media, obviously, there was that whole question of, what happens to the workforce when all of the graduates and the junior employees are no longer joining the workforce because AI has taken away all their jobs. That, of course, is a huge problem. It's a developmental debt problem because who do you promote to middle manager or senior manager if you don't have a pipeline? It's the same concept. So again, just because you can automate something doesn't mean you should automate it. So that's number 4, and developmental debt, a very, very important consideration. And then the 5th consideration and the final shift that I'm seeing is really how do you move human resources from just being the compliance function to actually being a real cultural steward? And you know better than I do that HR and the role HR has been to protect the organization, to make sure we didn't have lawsuits, to make sure people were leaving the company in the right way, to make sure we were following process. That was the role of HR, of course, and it still is. But actually, the role is much more important with AI. As I say, AI is such an amplifier of the culture you have. We need to manage a culture and steward a culture of good AI governance, I think. And governance is probably the main pillar of the culture that you need. But in terms of its responsible use, we really need to know how we govern the algorithms, how we're being transparent, who's taking decisions, and who has accountability for things. So if you're trying to build a culture where AI is really, really embedded in a company, I think you need to do these 3 things on the slide. The first is make sure you're auditing your algorithms and your use cases for fairness. Now, no one's deliberately doing incorrect things. No one's deliberately making mistakes or trying to introduce bias into processes, but we need to audit them. We need to have and understand how they're working, how they're influencing people and decisions, and making sure we're training the algorithms on clean and clear data. So this is the first thing. Do we have fairness? The second is how much visibility do we give to employees and candidates? And it's interesting, there's something driving me crazy at the moment right now on LinkedIn, which is whenever you apply to a job, you have to tick a terms and conditions box, which says, do you agree we're going to use your data for, in the use of AI and your data is going to go into a talent pool? Well, you have no choice but to accept that term and condition, I suspect, if you want to apply to the job. But even worse than that, you then normally get like 2 or 3 questions which say, can you tell me of a time when you had this experience? And what we're seeing is most candidates go to ChatGPT and copy and paste a stock answer. So not only are companies being flooded with low quality information, but employees are going through a process which is completely absurd as well. But interestingly, we are not giving visibility and transparency to candidates or employees about how and why we're using their data. It goes into a black box. And I don't think people can cope with that. I think we can perfectly cope when we say, I'm going to use your data, Dan, for the next 24 hours in this way, and then I'll delete it. I would say, wow, that's pretty transparent and clear. But at the moment, we're not going to that level of depth. And I think employees and candidates deserve to see how their data is being used, how the decisions about them are being made. And we need to be aware of that because actually, if you're opaque, you breed distrust in a process. And we can't afford that if we want to adopt AI in the best way. So try to be transparent, try to talk about these things, socialize why and how you're using AI with your employees, and be very clear on that. So the best companies are typically setting up AI councils where workers get to come and talk to the managers or the leaders of projects about the use cases and really understand in detail how and why the data is being used. And then the third thing about building a great culture and a culture of strong governance is override. Who owns the decision? And I always say this, and I always say in joke, I often use ChatGPT to tell me whatever city I'm in, where's the best sushi restaurant. And it's great for that because it can search much faster than I can. It can tell me exactly where to go, and it can show me the ratings of the restaurants. The question is, if I drive or take a taxi or walk to one of these sushi restaurants, and I get there and I knock on the door and the door's closed or locked, the restaurant is not open, who is to blame for that? Who is at fault? Who is the responsible one? I'm sure the AI is not the responsible one. I am sure that I am the responsible one. And I think as AI gives us more and more opportunities to outsource our thinking, switch off our brains, we need to fight against that. We need to make sure there's always a human who can override a process or make a different decision. For me, this is fundamental. Algorithms can help, but they cannot be accountable for decisions. And of course, not every decision has to be 100% all of the time. Not every piece of work that we do needs to be 100% accurate. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So you may have more or less human in the loop or human override protocols depending upon the process, but you always need them. The system cannot have the final word on someone's career or someone's promotion. A human always needs to be the accountable. So I think actually that work belongs to human resources. We need to be the stewards. We need to manage this culture of good and strong governance. And we don't do that from just managing and having compliance and having policies. We do that from living these principles and really bringing them to life in the organizations. So these are the 5 shifts. And in terms of what I've observed in the best companies so far, how they're leading through this reckoning and this decision, they're really following these 4 steps. Number 1, they're saying, we understand we're at this inflection point. We understand that the function needs to redesign itself or change shape ever so slightly. And actually, by the way, this is not about doing massive reorganization in HR. It's about allocating resources to the right areas. So they're understanding that this is a challenge and they need to face it. They're saying, let's sequence these shifts deliberately. So let's go through them one by one rather than trying to solve all 5 at the same time. Let's start with work design, for example, and help the organization rework and challenge those assumptions about why and how we're doing things. They're investing in trust before they need it. So as I say, trust is not like the tap that you can just turn on and get water out of it. You need to build that over time. So we need to start having courageous conversations. We need to have a clear vision that we're selling and sharing to the employees. And we need to show when AI works and when it doesn't work, and show that actually we're on a journey of testing and learning. And the best at engineering that developmental friction. So they're making sure they're not falling into the trap of removing judgment and the grind that built your muscle. Because actually, when you do, you fail. So keep trying things, keep building, and that is really, really critical. And so I just leave you with this. I'm going to go into a second part, but I leave you with this. This is the choice that you have when it comes to these 5 shifts. Every function of HR has this choice, and they have to face it today or in the next decade. But you have to face it. You either choose to go left and you say, fantastic, AI is going to optimize everything. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a function which is faster. We're going to have a function which is cheaper, one that follows the regulations and is more compliant, but is not more strategic. And what that means is we reduce from 400 to 40 and probably down to 4 in the near future. So we reduce headcount, we become cheaper, we take out cost. Or we say, let's go right. Let's choose to become genuinely strategic as a function. Let's design work. Let's add judgment, human value. Let's build trust. Let's build capability and people's skills. And let's have a great culture. And actually, for me, that's the function which will add value, net new value to the business by being strategic and doing those actions. So for me, the choice is clear, but you can choose. The reckoning is happening to us day by day anyway. It's like, the earth is spinning. We can't slow that process down. We can't slow down the pace of technological advancement. It is going to happen whether we like it or not. But the question is, are you going to face it first or last? Are you going to go left or are you going to go right? Only you can decide. I won't tell you what's better or worse, but I do think turning right and becoming strategic is definitely the fun approach. So that is the Quiet Reckoning and the 5 Principles. And as I say, the book was launched yesterday. You can find that on Amazon. I think I've got a copy here. It's a wonderful book. It's, nearly 300 pages in color with graphs, charts, practical hints and tips and tools. And I think everyone really deserves to read it because it will help you transform your function and make you stronger. And what I wanted to do now is really show you a few of those practical things coming from it. And if we keep those 5 shifts in our mind, we need to say, okay, so what does that really mean? It means that HR needs to change. And I'm proposing a new operating model for HR, the HR operating model of the now. And actually, it's a new operating model, but like I say, it's not a transformation that's happening. It's a reallocation of resources and a change in mindset, perhaps. So why do we need a new model? Of course, all of these changes are happening. The quiet reckoning is happening, whether we like it or not. AI is disrupting everything. And actually, there's constant change in the business. So how can HR support the business in the best way possible if we're not also changing constantly? Expectations are going through the roof. I mean, I love this one. I always struggled with why it would take a bank 5 to 7 working days to send someone a debit card when Amazon delivers my groceries in an hour to my doorstep. The expectations of customers, but also employees, are going through the roof. So people want more from HR than ever before. They want hyper personalization and they want a great service. And of course, don't get me wrong, all of this is against the backdrop of most CEOs and investors and shareholders and stakeholders saying we need productivity and we need to grow our business. So there are cost pressures aligned to this. So HR needs to change. It needs to become very agile. It needs to become strategic. It needs to be data driven, and it needs to focus on the human at the center, of course. So what does it look like in practice? Now, a complex diagram here, and you're going to have the slides, whether you're watching live or on recording, you're going to have the slides. And if you have questions, do reach out to me. But for me, it's very simple, actually. There are 3 layers within the HR model. And none of them are new. Some of them are expanded and some of them are shrunk. So the top layer is your strategic HR layer. So this for me is your value creation and sense making layer. And I like to think of the chief HR officer in this layer acting as kind of like a Sherpa, a Sherpa that takes people up the mountains. I think that's the role of HR, and the chief HR officer is the one who guides the organization through all the change that's happening in the market. And what does he or she need in the organization? They need centers of value creation. And this is very important. I've changed it from centers of excellence to centers of value creation because for me, it's a mindset shift. We still need experts and excellence on certain processes and topics. Of course we do. But we need them to be business focused. We need to only do things when it adds value to the business, not because it's nice for HR. So I want centers of value creation with experts, and I would love these people to be rotating and moving from place to place, project to project on a constant basis, as I would with the HR business partners, who I would love to reposition as consultants to the business. Now, again, this is something we've been talking about for years and years and years now. How is the HR BP role strategic? It shocks me and surprises me no end. Many don't know how to read a balance sheet. Many can't understand or know how the business makes money, and many of them do. And surprise, surprise, the ones that do and who are close to the business do a great job. They get way more benefit than those who don't. So I want them to take this mindset of being a consultant, of adding value, work with the centers of value creation to propose things to the business that they need, and add value, create net new positive action. So for me, 2 fundamental blocks, working in a very agile way, which I'll explain, and focused on value creation. And I do think there's a new role, which is an AI and ethics officer, or an AI and ethics office for the people function, for the company, for the organization. Because as I say, if we let compliance dictate certain things, we're in trouble. If we let IT and technology just implement, we're in trouble. We need the human lens, and I think we can lead on this one. So for me, this is all about strategic HR, high leverage, low volume activity, but very, very critical. Then the middle layer is perhaps not the new layer, but the one that expands the most. This is the AI first employee experience and orchestration layer. This is all about what technology do we have to do employee and manager self-service. Now, I don't know about you, but another example from the banking industry, when banks implemented mobile banking, customers became 3 times happier. Why? Because they could do it themselves and it was easy and it was in one click. This is the experience that employees now want. So we need great people in here who are helping us build those platforms, those agents, taking a product mindset to everything. And you probably have technology here, you have your AI agents here, and then you have people who are experts in redesigning work, experts in employee experience, experts in mapping processes. So a very thin human layer and a much more digital layer, but a very vital layer nevertheless. And then on the bottom, and it's unfortunate that it's on the bottom because it's foundational, but it's your transactional HR. And there's not a huge change here. There's an upskilling, but there's not a huge change. This is your operational excellence foundation layer. So these are your HR shared services. These are your operational hubs, the people who do, the machines who do payroll, benefits, contracts, and so on. And I think there's probably an upskilling in terms of the technology getting better, more accurate in this space, so operations can become better, more efficient, more accurate. And you probably need to add a few people who are looking at the data and doing compliance and audits on how the technology is working. But not a great change, but a very fundamental base. So if they're the three layers in HR, there's two other elements that are missing. And they're two vertical columns that you can see on either side. And for me, very, very important vertical columns. Now, the first column is having an AI intelligence spine. So those three layers only work if you have great technology running up and down those layers. If the CHRO is the Sherpa, the AI intelligence spine is the data. And this is really, probably a 4-stage process for most companies. And in my research, I've met probably 25% of companies who are in the first stage, and 25% who are in the middle stage, and 25% in the top stage. So there's no right or wrong. There's no pace of change right now. Everybody's in one of these 4 stages. But basically it says you are either in stage 1 or you're progressing up the levels. And if you're in stage 1, you're using AI as a personal assistant. So you are using Copilot. You're trying to improve your productivity on an individual basis. But as you move through and your function evolves more and more, you might be using agents, for example, on a specific task, or you might be using super agents where you have 3 or 4 agents working in cohort with each other on a piece of work. Now, a good example of this agent or super agent use would be, payroll processing, for example. You may have one agent working to check that the payroll has been processed correctly. You may have a second agent, which is a compliance agent in payroll to make sure, yes, it was processed correctly and on time. You may have a third, which is a fraud agent that then says, were there any strange payments in the payroll that shouldn't have been done, even though they were processed correctly? Is there any fraud happening in the organization? And these agents start to talk to each other and work with each other in this third stage. And then in the fourth stage, you get to a point where the agents become autonomous and they start working on their own. And the only role of humans in that is just to have oversight and make sure the agents are doing as they should be doing. But it's an evolution from function to function. The key is not that you go from 1 to 4 or 4 to 1. That's not the point. The point is you need AI, you need that intelligence spine throughout the whole HR function. Start in stage 1 and just build and build and build your capability, because the more capability you build, the more strategic you will become. Now, let me jump ahead. Let me jump back to this one, sorry, which is the model. The other vertical pillar is the agile operating rhythm. Now, I'm a very, very big believer in agile methodology, not necessarily agile methodology in the sense of everything needs to be agile, and if you don't follow agile principles, you're terrible. No, more in the concepts that sit behind it. Because the business is changing so fast, because the technology is changing so fast, we need to change fast. And that's why the centers of value creation and the HR business partners should be pools of people rotating on different projects in an agile way. What I mean is HR needs to start adopting business goals and business targets, so we show we're connected to the business value. It means we need to work in those agile pools and squads of people. We need to work with the mentality of testing and learning things so we can go faster and not be scared of failure and afraid of failure. So for me, you have technology at one side and you have agile methodology at the other side. And of course, I have more slides that I'll send to you. I won't go through today, but you need to build some skills related to that, and you need to build some mindsets related to that as well. It's not something that you can just say, tomorrow we're agile, but I think step by step you can transform. Now, interestingly, I did some mapping, and in the book I go through in detail, but there's 180 use cases for using AI in HR. And actually, I've tried to categorize them in 10 functions that may be familiar to you, and also across basic use cases, medium use cases, and expert use cases. And the interesting thing here is actually not necessarily the use case. The point is, there is a lot of opportunity out there. The question is, which opportunity do you want to take? And the best functions I see are the ones who are being very deliberate and systemic about choosing where do we place our bets. And it was very interesting because, there's a coffee shop in the United Kingdom called Costa Coffee. And what they did was they automated their hiring process using AI, and they were using a company called Sapia. And they said, actually, what we're going to do, because we have 250,000 applications every year for 5,000 roles, we need some technology to help us because our managers in the stores are just overwhelmed. And they decided to set up a behavioral interview where candidates would answer a few questions, either in text or spoken. They'd receive a report at the end, and they'd be offered a job or help through the report to find a job elsewhere. And satisfaction went through the roof. The candidates, once they joined the company, stayed longer than ever before, and it was a huge success. But it was interesting because David, who was leading the program, said, you need to place your bets carefully. And we chose this one because it was high volume, high impact. If we'd have spread our efforts over 5 or 6 cases, we probably wouldn't have been so successful. So I leave you with that just as an anecdote of it is important. There are so many use cases. There's no roadmap here to what you should and shouldn't do. However, I have one red flag that is absolutely glaring, which is to say, just because you can automate it doesn't mean you should, not only for developmental debt, but because of principle number 1. Humans can add massive value on certain processes. Now, a good example is recruitment. So Costa Coffee for frontline retail-based workers could automate the process only using AI, and people were happy and content with that. But actually, if you were trying to hire a CEO of a company, would that be appropriate? Probably not. Would it be great that the AI sends the contract to your new CEO automated? Technically, yes. In practice, probably not. The manager or the chairman of the board picking up the phone and saying, Dan, I'm so happy that you're going to join us. I'm really looking forward to it. I'll send you your contract now, but I just wanted to speak to you first, would make the world of difference. As it would in performance management. When you're having a difficult performance conversation, would you like honest feedback given with empathy and a path forwards, or would you like an automated email? I know what I would prefer. So again, we need to be mindful of that. Humans add a lot of value in human resources, and our processes, just because they cannot be automated, doesn't mean they should. So I've given you 10 ideas here of, what are the non-negotiables in HR, according to me. And, the offer call is a non-negotiable. The difficult conversation is a non-negotiable. Executive coaching is a non-negotiable. Crisis support is a non-negotiable. There are things and there are red lines that I really don't think we should cross, and we can take advantage of that. So just to sum up, I know it's been a very, very fast whistle-stop tour. We've been through 5 shifts that are really, really critical. I've shared with you a high-level view of the operating model and some of those processes that could or could not be automated with AI or augmented with AI. The reality is, for me, the future of work is definitely not about human versus AI. It is definitely human and AI. That is inescapable. I don't think anyone can disagree with that. But the question is, and the addendum is, it is human with AI guided by HR, because no one else in the organization is going to guide and make sure that humans and AI are working together. No one else can help the organization succeed like we can. And I think this is our massive, massive opportunity. So I just want you to leave you with that view, which actually, if we want to succeed, we do need to change. We need to stay human. We need to really double down on some of those things. And we need to become strategic as a function and not look at AI just for reducing costs and taking things out of the function. So I'm going to have a sip of my cup of tea. And if anyone live wants to ask any question, feel free to come off mute, ask a question, or put it in the chat. I'll open up the chat box now in case anyone's already put anything in there. Oof, a lot of things for me to read. My goodness. Okay, so I'll read this whilst I'm sipping my tea. But if anyone has a live question, feel free. And like I say, it might be scary because there are 300 people who've asked for the recording. So we'll be documenting this and giving them the recording. But this is your chance. Now you're here.
I was just going to say thanks, Dan. Like, it's so validating to hear some of this stuff. There's a lot of things that you called out there that I think are really critical, and I'm definitely seeing. I think one of the biggest ones that you call out there is around the mindset shifts, and actually this kind of being able, from an HR perspective, being able to shift at like our own mindsets in terms of thinking in that kind of evolutionary, iterative approach. I was out with some leaders this week just talking about adopting an agile mindset and why it's so right for this time. But it's kind of going back to the principles, because everything's moving so fast. I think it's how you can kind of create that environment where people can be comfortable with that world of constant change. And I think, Debbie, you mentioned like some of the stuff that it's always changing, and by the time you've done this assessment, it's changed again. So I think it's that kind of shifted mindset of being able to operate in an iterative way, but also create the conditions that enable the team around you to be part of that process and try and make it fun rather than something that is kind of a scary challenge. So really loved your take, mate.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And I'm reading the chat here, and Debbie, I love your build actually on the judgment, because it's true. There's capability everywhere. So how do we ensure that comes to the forefront is really important. And as you say, Tom, the 4 mindsets that I propose actually for HR are product-led mindset, scientific mindset, consulting mindset, and a growth mindset. And actually, it's how HR thinks, not what it knows, that is important. Because if we have a product mindset, we are thinking about what's right for the employee and the business, which is fundamental. And we haven't really had a product mindset. If you want to know the truth, HR has had a functional mindset, and that's been difficult, I think. So if we think of ourselves as adding value to the business, the employees, the managers, and the candidates, we think with a product mindset. The scientific mindset is to say we're testing and learning constantly, so we need data to make sure we're doing the right things. And do you know what? I've never been fired from a job, but I've never been told off either when I've gone to a meeting and said, I'm just going to test and learn something, and I'm going to come with some numbers and we're going to see if it works. That always gets you permission. So scientific mindset, really important. Then the consulting mindset, just like I want the HR business partners to consult with the business, the idea is, yes, we're going to help you with the delivery and the execution, but we need the strategy first. So we need to act like consultants who really understand the business, the needs, and then propose solutions. And the final mindset about having a growth mindset is, if we're going to be working in an agile way, if we're going to be partnering with technology, that's not going to happen from a place where we're limited and we're only looking through one lens. We need to look through the lens of HR can be strategic. It can add so much value. It can do so much good in the world, but we need growth to enable that. So yeah, happy that I could double click a little bit on those mindsets, because I think they're really, really critical. Anyone else? Any other question or observation? We've probably got time for one more. If not, I'll just do a wrap up, just to say, everybody, thank you for attending live. If you've come live, thank you for watching the recording as you watch it. All of you will have access to the recording, access to the slide deck, access to me, anything you need, any questions you have. This is probably my passion. This is not a work. This is not a chore. This is a leisure and a pleasure, strange as it sounds. But I'm really loving this. I'm really loving going around the world, seeing what companies and organizations are doing. And I'm so enthusiastic that this is our time, but we need to make that decision. Let's not go left and go into the automation and the reduction. Let's go right and let's become strategic and grow. So that's my closing wish for all of us, is to take this opportunity, because it doesn't come along often. And thank you for all your comments in the chat. Really, really nice to see this. You know what I'll do, in case anyone hasn't found it, I will see if I can put the link to the book just in case anyone wants that there. That is a real link to Amazon. This is not a spam link, so don't worry about clicking. I promise, although that's what obviously a scammer would say. But no, it's a pleasure. I might delete that from the final video, but there we are. That's my brand. Very nice to have you all here with me today. Thank you so much for spending an hour on a Friday. I know you probably had lunch and other commitments, so it means the world to me. And I look forward to accompanying you on this journey with anything you need. Have a good rest of the day and happy weekend when it comes.
Cheers, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.